Hey there, educator. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Lanisha, and I'm all about helping educators make meaningful connections in math instruction. If you've ever attended one of my live professional development sessions, then you know how truly passionate I am about this teacher life. PD for the Soul is my space for providing professional development on the go, where you can take what you need and place the rest on the shelf for another day. New episodes drop every Sunday at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is where we will dive into strategies, routines, and insights to help students build deeper understanding. And here's something new. Our monthly newsletter launches on March 1st. This will be your go-to spot for links to all resources we discuss on the podcast. I want you to have everything in one place. Plus, I'll share the books that will shape upcoming solo episodes in case you want to read along. But that's not all. The newsletter will also explore connections across domains and grade levels, because when we keep those connections at the core of our instruction, we give students the tools to make generalizations that make new concepts more accessible. So, hit subscribe, stay connected, and let's make math happen. See you in the episode. Hey there, educator. So last week, my classmates and I were tasked with conducting an observation. We had to plan for it using one of the templates from the Formative 5 text and document what we saw. I'll include a link to my completed plan in the show notes. One thing I pride myself on is paying attention. When I read the term professional noticer a few weeks ago, I thought that's me for sure. But this process, planning and following through, made my observations so much more intentional. At first, I had concerns. Will teachers feel like they have time for this? Teachers already have so much on their plates. Would this feel like just another task on top of all the others? Then I quickly realized the answer is no. Emphatically no. Can we get real for a moment? This is a safe space for honest conversation, so here goes. Many of us aren't as organized as we should be, and it's hurting our impact. We aren't leaving planning periods with enough tangible outcomes. And I know what some of you are thinking. We don't have planning time. We have meetings. In a lot of cases, that's true. There are meetings, and some of them may feel like a waste of time, but others are necessary. Meeting parents, analyzing data, discussing lessons, and aligning with the school's direction? Yeah, necessary. Education is full of moving parts, and just like we anticipate student responses in class, we have to anticipate the moments that might derail our plans. We have to let go of the idea that we can get everything done within the school day. More often than not, that's just not realistic. The way we combat this reality is by creating a plan and sticking to it. I wrote this script 2 weeks ago on a Saturday morning while everyone was still sleeping. Find your window of time and commit to a well-planned week ahead. When the week begins and everything is shifting, it's much easier to adjust an existing plan than to scramble because you never had one to begin with. So let's talk about why these observations are worth it. In my own experience, I noticed that certain students whose names have been changed to protect the innocent disengaged at specific points in the lesson. Because I was observing intentionally, I was able to intervene, ask key questions, and help them overcome their challenges. Think about those students who always miss success by a small margin. Imagine if we were more intentional in observing their behaviors and better prepared to support their needs. Today we will discuss Show Me, Hinge Question, and the Exit Task. These are the last 3 strategies of the Formative 5. The text references Shavelson, Baxter, and Pine's statement that a good assessment makes a good teaching activity and a good teaching activity makes a good assessment. Show Me is a performance response by a student or group of students that extends and often deepens what was observed and what might have been asked within the interview. Show Me is interactive in that its use can provide an indication as to the extent to which what has been taught has been learned. In other words, we are monitoring student progress towards the goal and using what is shown to make instructional decisions. As I read about Show Me, my mind drifted to where we are in my district. We just finished data dives, which is where we discuss what the data tells us, what are the implications of performance, and what we should do next. Only 38% of students across the district were able to successfully divide 14/15 and 7/15. When my teachers and I looked at student work, we discovered students either combined the idea of division and adding or subtracting, or they attempted to multiply by the reciprocal and got lost in the calculations. How could the use of Show Me have helped in preparation for the assessment or just mastering the concept overall? And how can it help as we move forward? Well, we know the expectation for this standard is for students to divide using common denominators, emphasizing the use of visual models. While teaching and now re-engaging, we need to pay attention to how students approach similar problems. For students who selected 2/15 as a response, they knew they needed to divide, but they fumbled with what to do with the denominator. This is where the visual models are important in the instruction. Can students show that this expression is really asking us how many 7/15 are in 14/15? If a student can show that, they can determine the reasonableness of their response. If a student can't show that, they are likely confused about the parts and are relying on a memorized technique. According to Fennell, Cobbett, and Ray, Show Me is your opportunity to engage students in showing or demonstrating their conceptual understandings, procedural knowledge, use of particular representations or tools, and their engagement of the standards for mathematical practices, particularly, but not exclusively, reasoning and modeling with mathematics. There are 6 questions that guide the planning for the use of this technique in your classroom. Number 1, why would you use the Show Me technique? In the example shared above, teachers might use this technique to determine if students understand how one fraction relates to the other. Number 2, where might Show Me opportunities occur within the lesson? Since teachers are now re-engaging students after seeing that very few were successful on the benchmark assessment, Show Me should be used throughout the lesson. There may be specific students or groups of students where this is more critically important for. Number 3, how will you organize your classroom to implement Show Me each day? This question is all about maximizing success. Are there tools that are necessary, manipulatives, or whiteboards that you need to have accessible? How will you record what students do for further reflection after their lesson? Although we're superheroes, teachers, you aren't superhuman. And you shouldn't expect yourself to remember every single thing there is to remember. So having a place to record things is definitely helpful. Number 4, as you implement Show Me, what entree questions or statements might you use as you seek a deeper understanding of student thinking? An example would be, show me how to find the quotient of 14/15 and 7/15 using a visual model. Number 5, what might you anticipate from students? Again, referencing the example from my district, we can expect students to combine the ideas of division and addition. We can also expect students to multiply by the reciprocal. The re-engagement sessions could be an opportunity to show students what was done and have them connect their visual models to those responses. This could also be an opportunity to show a range of strategies and have a discussion about the connections throughout. For example, students could connect the visual model to dividing straight across and multiplying by the reciprocal. Although the latter isn't an expectation for 6th grade, we know students have been exposed to it because it showed in their work. So how can we leverage what students have been exposed to maximize understanding across the range of students in our classroom? Remember, we are building students' capacity to determine when it makes the most sense to use a strategy. So seeing and deeply understanding more than one, it's helpful in us achieving that goal. Number 6, how might you follow up after a Show Me request? How will you extend what has been accomplished in today's session? Many of us have students practicing. The question for this particular segment in today's show is, how purposeful is the practice? Do students know the goal? Are you providing students with feedback that can progress their learning? Or are students just working until the timer sounds and we are expecting something to stick? In my interview with Dr. Lamb that's dropping next week, she talks about the power of relationships to build engagement and engagement to build student achievement. In the book, Fennell, Cobbett, and Ray note that classrooms should be places where all students are expected to engage in the mathematics they are learning every single day. But how do we do this, especially in the middle when so many students are distracted by hormones and cell phones? It's all in the relationships we build and the questions we ask. Teaching is one of the most difficult jobs. We have to listen to what is being said, process it, analyze it, and respond in a way that progresses student thinking and learning in the matter of seconds. Yes, we are superheroes. Unfortunately, it does take time to perfect those powers. The text provides a framework for questions. Consider these questions while also considering, where do the questions you typically ask fall within the framework? Number 1, gathering information. Students recall facts, justifications, or procedures. Number 2, probing thinking. Students explain, elaborate, or clarify their thinking, including articulating the steps in solution methods for the completion of a task. Number 3, making the math visible. Students discuss mathematical structure and make connections among mathematical ideas and relationships. Number 4, encouraging reflection and justification. Students reveal deeper understanding of their reasoning and actions, including making an argument for the validity of their work. As you all know, I'm a coach, so I'm in and out of classrooms supporting teachers and students all throughout the week. There is an urgency in these classrooms, but it's not the kind that focuses students and makes them feel purpose-driven. It's the kind that rushes them and likely results in disengagement. How are you with your wait time? Do you ask a question and immediately start looking for students to respond? Or do you ask a question and request that students take a moment to think, perhaps even write down a couple of ideas? If you're not quite at the latter stage, this is your chance to shift. If your whole class was on the same level and had the ability to process your question and provide a correct answer immediately, then maybe it would be okay to have that expectation. However, for most of us, classrooms have varying levels of understanding and achievement. One student's swift response says nothing about the other kids in the classroom. He or she is only one of many. So now we understand that show me is a demonstration or a performance response on the behalf of the student. But what is the Hinge question? It's the question you ask that truly provides feedback to guide your next steps, both within the lesson and moving forward into the next day's lesson. It can occur at the end of class or throughout your class, and it's an opportunity to gauge student understanding before proceeding to the next portion of the day's activities. In some instances, the Hinge question is included in our curriculum, perhaps by another name. The text shares examples of what teachers have done in their classrooms, like adding multiple choice options so they have an understanding of student thinking based on their responses. So how do you plan for the Hinge? Well, first of all, by thinking about how you will use the Hinge questions as you teach. Will it be at the end or throughout? If within the lesson, when is it most critical? What format will render the most useful results? Number 2, how will you use the responses, especially if you use the Hinge question as a whole class interview? What responses will result in what response from you, the teacher? What determines the class proficiency and readiness to move forward? Number 3, how will you consider student responses to Hinge questions? How are students submitting these responses? What is your plan to effectively analyze those responses? Number 4, what type of questions are you asking? Where does it fall within that questioning framework that we talked about earlier? You can review the math focus of the day to determine this. Number 5, what might you anticipate in asking the Hinge question? What are the possible responses? Should this question be a whole group or a small group question? Do students need access to manipulative materials or devices to respond? All of these things we have to consider as we're planning for that Hinge point. One key takeaway from this section of the text is how critical planning is. There's a planning tool included that has space for you to know where in the lesson does this Hinge question live? What are the anticipated responses and what are the possible next steps? So let's pause so that we can synthesize. Over the last couple of episodes, solo episodes that is, we've discussed 4 of the 5 formative 5. We talked about observation, which is how professional noticing can shed light on student thinking and their progress towards the goal. Then we talked about the interview, a brief conversation where students can explain their thinking. Today, we highlighted the show me technique, a performance response where students demonstrate and orally explain their thinking. And just now, we concluded our review of the Hinge question technique, and that is an intentionally placed check for understanding. Our last stop is the exit task. A 2014 NCTM published work notes that effective formative assessment involved using tasks that elicit evidence to inform subsequent instruction. According to Fennell, Cobbett, and Ray, the exit task is a capstone problem or task that captures the major focus of the lesson and provides a sampling of student performance. In discussing what constitutes as an exit task, the text compares an exercise to a high cognitive demand task. So an example of an exercise could be something like what many would call naked problems, where we have 2.5 and we're dividing it by 4. A high cognitive demand task would be something like use drawings or manipulatives to represent the solution of 2.5 pies being shared by 4 people. How much would each person get? What if there were 5 people? How much would each person get in that scenario? What are the differences in these problems? Pause the recording and reflect. Here's what came to mind for me. The exercise is a low level because all students have to do is follow the procedure for dividing fractions and they should be good. The task, on the other hand, is high level because not only are procedures present, so are the connections by way of the visual model. This thought process, comparing the kind of question being asked, aligns closely with Webb's depth of knowledge model from 1997. Here's the thing. There's a place for both the exercise and the high cognitive demand task. Your goal for the day will determine which problem is most appropriate. The show me and the exit task are alike in that they both are performative. The major difference between the two is show me is used throughout the lesson, and maybe for the class, or it could be for small groups. And the exit task is at the close of a lesson or cluster of lesson and is usually for the entire class. I will mention though that you can obviously differentiate your closure task to provide access to all students. Now, as you plan for your exit task, let's consider 6 things. 1, how will you use this exit task? When conducted, the exit task will provide individual student progress towards proficiency. How will you analyze and use student responses? Number 2, where will you get the exit task? They may come from your curriculum, a community of resources, or you may have to create your own. If the latter is the case, make sure you feel comfortable creating your own. Number 3, how will you plan for the use of the exit task? What level of cognitive demand or depth of knowledge is appropriate for what you need to assess for today's lesson? How will you use the results to plan future lessons? Number 4, will you use an exit task daily or after a cluster of lessons? Number 5, how will you summarize student responses and provide feedback? Number 6, how will you organize your classroom to implement the exit task? How much time will students need? What resources should be available? Are there any special seating arrangements necessary? At the start of this particular leg in my solo episode journey, we discussed using formative assessment to move the needle. In that initial episode, I referenced Inside the Black Box, an article by Black and William released in 1998, and its assertion that improving formative assessments improves standards. The research in that article suggested that strengthening the practice of formative assessments produces significant and substantial gains. I emphasized how critical it is for students to know the goal, know where they stand in relation to the goal, and know what specific actions can close the gap or extend them beyond the goal. In the next episode, we examined the role of assessment and began to dig into Fennell, Cobbett, and Ray's Formative 5. I highlighted the first 2 techniques, being observation and interview, and their importance to understanding where students are so we can meet them there and take them further. And today, we are maximizing student outcomes with the final 3 techniques. It is my hope that after listening to this episode and the previous ones, you feel prepared to do just that. Earlier, I mentioned that we are superheroes. We have the hardest jobs ever. With that power, we must commit to showing up in full cape, ready to do what's best for the students in our classrooms. It won't always be easy, but I can promise you, it will always be worth it. Before I go, I have a challenge for you. Choose one of these techniques and implement it with intention. Observe what happens, document your takeaways, and let's continue to grow together. Next week, I'll be talking to Dr. Lamb about the power of relationships in engagement and student achievement. Trust me, this is an episode that you don't want to miss. Until next time, keep noticing, keep planning, and keep making an impact.